Okay, the next presentation, I will present myself, and normally I'd be co-presenting with Dick Edwards, my co-chair for this session, but he has a sciatic nerve problem, so he's going to sit still and not squeak out in pain. As we were discussing in the panel discussion, part of the challenge of space settlements is actually having a reason to go out there and build them. And this keeps on backing up. So what this presentation is about is what Dick and I have seen is, or could be triggering events. We're not going to say we have the triggering event, but what are triggering events that could occur in order to make space settlements happen. The space settlements will represent a huge investment in, especially in money, but also time and human capital, human effort. So there has to be a really, really good reason. Now, a little bit of background on why Dick and I are putting this together. It's been noted that Dick and I run the other space settlement design competition, the AIAA, or American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics International Space Settlement Design Competition. Those have been going since 1984. We've done 59 live competitions, weekend competitions. We have our, there have been local ones, international ones. The international finals will have the 14th iteration in July this year at Johnson Space Center. We currently do 4 per year and have over 100 students. The format only allows 160 students per competition. But that means we influence a lot of students. And in the process of doing this, we find that students don't want to just play at this. We want to make it a realistic experience, and the students want it to be a realistic experience as well. These are industry simulation games. We do the best we can at making the experience like being on a real proposal team in industry. So the students want a different challenge every year. We want to make them as realistic as possible. So we have compressed a development schedule for the first 9 very large settlements between now and the year 2070, or this cycle it might be like 2075 or something like that, which means that the first settlement needs to happen really, really quickly in order to put together these space settlement scenarios for high school kids. So we're looking for what's a really compelling reason for space settlements, just to have something realistic for the students. Do we believe this is what's going to happen? No, we don't believe this is what's going to happen. But that's what caused Dick and I to have to think really, really seriously about what would be triggering events for space settlements. When we first started out these kinds of things, it was sufficient in the 1980s, which was an age of me, and it was called the me generation, and conspicuous consumption, and you do it just because. The thought was, if we have wealthy customers and they want to live in space, then they'll just spend their money and go do it, and they don't need any reason, because in the 80s we didn't need any reason to do a lot of the things that people did back then. However, when we got into the 1990s, we actually started representing the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. We're representing a federal agency. We were funded by them, and we felt we needed to be a little bit more responsible than just saying the customer's wealthy and they can do whatever they please because they have money and they just want to spend it. We still wanted to show the same timeline, showing that space settlements and all of this infrastructure could happen within the span of the careers of the students that were playing the game with us or doing this exercise with us. There were a lot of early opinions about what would cause an interest in space settlements, or what would be the triggers. G. Harry Stein, a really interesting book, The Third Industrial Revolution, which he meant was manufacturing in space, putting industry into space, and literally he thought that this is in 1975, so billions of dollars then was a whole lot more billions of dollars in current day dollars than the numbers you would see then. So he saw a huge market. We agree with that. But he saw things like $38 per pound to launch stuff from Earth's surface into orbit. That is not a typo. That is what he wrote and what he believed. And that is not happening, not anytime soon. So with launch costs of $38 a pound, well, it doesn't take much to see, yeah, let's just go out there. It was a little bit unrealistic. Jerry O'Neill.
Adjusted 38.
I'm sorry?
But if you adjust that.
Well, if you adjusted it, it might be like $100.
Okay.
It ain't. I mean, that's order of magnitude. It's not even that, and it's won't be for a while. Gerard O'Neill, and in fact, there were several books based on the 1970 summer studies by O'Neill, Heppenheimer, Golden. They all came out around 1976, 1977. And the summer study people were talking about energy and solar power satellites, build solar power satellites. Well, now we know if we were going to build solar power satellites, by the time we did that, we'd probably use robots and wouldn't need many people, so that's not entirely realistic. I love this one, Ray Bradbury, introducing Tom Heppenheimer's colonies in space. Just, let's do it. And thank you, Ray, we love you. But there is a budgetary thing, and when you write science fiction, it's very possible to ignore those little realities. We still love Ray, and he's got the right idea. Ben Bova, who will be speaking tonight, I guess it's probably not a good idea to remind him this evening of his 1981 statement in the High Road that we had an economic collapse 7 years ago. Well, that didn't happen, did it? So, oops. So that would have been a rationale, I guess.
Off by a decade.
Yeah, maybe one decade, maybe. Yeah, it's interesting. I have these books in my library, and that's what I just took it right out of the books. More recently, if you can call 1992 recent, this is an interesting book. 8 easy steps to colonize the galaxy, and okay, the destiny thing I can go along with, and maybe the resources thing. The interesting thing about this book is you look in the index and there's nothing about launch vehicles. Kind of a minor little detail. And once you get out there, we can see a lot of progress. It's kind of like the California freeway thing. You build a freeway in a place where there's nothing, and like Interstate 5 going from the Sacramento area down to Los Angeles, it's built on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley. There was nothing there. There was cropland. Well, now there are hotels and little towns and gas stations because there are a couple hundred miles of pavement that people were going on, and you have services out there, so the towns happen. But you do need to have the space equivalent of a car or a train or an airplane or something. Not having launch vehicles kind of, for me, lost credibility. I haven't met Michael Savage, but there might be some.
You have the bypass bridge system.
That's right.
Yeah, the whole bypass bridge system with the laser launch.
Well, laser launch space planes.
There are a bunch of things that were entirely.
That is not gone anywhere.
But he has an idea.
Yeah, he had an idea, and more recently, this was off of space.com, and you see a lot of this. I like Spread Life and Beautify the Universe. That's kind of like Manifest Destiny. The survival thing is interesting. Now, this one's right. Make money, save the environment. And I think Mark probably has kind of alluded to this, Mark Hopkins, that we just need to get the public informed that there's something good going on here. All right. So what we were looking for in trying to put together these events for high school students is to find a triggering event that would be critical, something that would enable immediately starting with space settlement construction because of the time frame we were operating in, so very immediate, very, very urgent. And then we got little obstacles of expense and no infrastructure, which just means more expense and more time. We saw that there are basically 3 imperatives for triggering events for humans doing anything. And you think about what triggers things to happen, there really are 3 basic reasons. And I'll go into these in more detail. But you either need a compelling economic reason, which has been mentioned by the panel, compelling political reason, which was alluded to, or a compelling survival reason. And I challenge folks, look at everything that humans do, and the motivation is one of these. At its core, one of those.
What about psychological? Keeping up with the Joneses, for instance.
That would be politics, you're right. That goes into politics.
Okay.
Yep. Because there can be
Social
personal,
interaction. Yeah.
certainly on a national scale, that's political, because the whole Apollo thing was Cold War politics. So it pretty much boils down to that. Let's look at those in detail as triggering events for space settlements. You look at the economic reason, and a really good economic reason is you have a product or some products that can only be built. You have to have lots of people working in space. If you don't have lots of people working in space, there's not a whole reason for a settlement. Oops, lost my curve. Okay, come on, get rid of it. Get it? Oh, that's good enough. The way industry works, for it to be a compelling economic reason, industry works on a 3-year return on investment. That's how industry works. There's one exception, pharmaceutical companies. Actually, aerospace companies are aircraft companies, like the Boeing commercial aircraft division does have a longer return on investment, but the space divisions of Boeing are under this 3-year thing, and actually the major aerospace companies are under this thing in their space businesses where they don't do proactive commercial type products. They're feeding at the public trough. They've been feeding at the public trough, and unless the government pays, the big aerospace companies are not interested in investing in space, which is really kind of sad. We're seeing a little bit of inroads in this area with Delta being private now, and certainly the satellite manufacturers. But talk about the kind of investment that has to be made to make space settlement happen. And the big aerospace companies will not do that kind of investment unless they know they can get that 3-year return. So in order to find that product, you got the catch-22. To find that product, you need to be out in space. If you don't have people out in space, you're not finding a product. It's not going to work. And if these companies, the companies that could find a product, or government contractors, are waiting for the government to help. So we didn't see this as the compelling reason for getting things going in 10 years. Just didn't seem to be right. There is a wild card, that's tourism. That may make things pop, we don't know. We'll see, but wasn't something we wanted to write about and represent as something that would cause space settlements to happen within 10 to 15 years, because you need to start building now. So the second reason could be a compelling political reason. And what a political reason generally means, especially in the United States, where there would be, well, cross fingers, there might be enough money to do this, is if or when politicians start losing or winning elections based on their stand on space, then we will be a political force. Until that happens, we just don't have a whole lot of political power. And that's just the way the government works. So you will have, for the foreseeable future, you will have people who believe that 1/3 of the federal budget is used for NASA, and that funding the space shuttle and space station and the Lunar Mars thing is taking food out of the mouths of the hungry who did whatever they did to get themselves in their situation. And of course, in reality, the NASA budget is less than 1% of the federal budget, and actually includes airplane research. So we're talking about 0.5% of the federal budget that would feed the poor people for maybe a week if we reallocated it. So the political thing is not going to happen. The American public seems to have a faith that the good things that NASA do are good things, that of course, because they're good, they'll keep on getting done. It seems to be an American feeling, the public feeling. So when people are, shall we say, stumping for things and talking to their politicians, it's not about space, with the exception of NSS and AIAA do some outreach into Congress. But whether or not they listen, they're going to listen to their constituents, and their constituents are just not clamoring. So that wasn't the reason we were looking for, which leaves the survival reason. And it kind of gets into the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle thing. When you've eliminated everything else that's not possible, then you go with what's left. So here we are, that's what's left. What you need is a threat of annihilation of the species if we don't do a space settlement. Oh my goodness, yes.
So we just need to build a Jim Day bomb?
That'll do it, yeah. Right out of Star Trek, yeah. Yeah, if the aliens come and say we're going to take over your planet unless you come to the meeting on the moon, or like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, well, of course we're going to get rid of your planet because it's in the way of a space bypass, and you didn't come to the meeting in Alpha Centauri, so what's your problem? Barring those things, yeah.
You don't think the global warming is
Well, now you just, I think in craps we call it a shill. It must be something obvious that people can accept, and I mean that's a good shit. I mean, thank you for leading me to the next chart.
The next line was, low brow or Michael Morris,
On the other hand, climates have been changing for millennia, and just because we're here, they're not going to stop doing that. And tell the guy who ran the guide service to cross the Bering Strait land bridge about global warming, because he's been through it. And the guy who had a farm on that, okay. So, or a caribou rental outfit or whatever it was. So we're looking for something that can be accepted as obvious, global, important enough to invest a huge amount of money, all those things. Of course, for our competition, it was important that you can solve it by building a space settlement. It can't be an immediate disaster like in 6 months the asteroid is going to come, because then you don't have time to build a space settlement. So you need to fine tune this and have large numbers of people in space. And the solution has to save the entire planet. So there we go. The Journal of the British Interplanetary Society, 1989, published a paper, Space-Based Solar Shield to Offset Green. You can read it. Okay? Very, very interesting. You build an umbrella the size of Texas. You put it at the Earth-Sun L1 libration point, which is somewhere around 900,000 or a million miles between here and the Sun, closer to Earth, of course. All you have to do is reduce the sunlight or the insolation 0.5%. You can do it with a solar shield about the size of Texas, and that solves the whole problem. Minor little thing, it's about the size of Texas, which is kind of like 800 miles in one direction and about that in the other direction.
What's the environmental impact of that?
Well, if it has an adverse environmental impact, you can take it somewhere else. But that's an interesting point, because there are other solutions proposed, like put chemicals in the atmosphere above the Arctic poles. So, once you do that, you can't reverse that. With a solar shield, you can move it. Okay? Or put louvers on it so you can mitigate its effects. Actually, L1 is a really easy place to maneuver from. You just quit station keeping and it drifts away. It's kind of like a saddle. So that's what we picked. Doesn't necessarily mean that we believe global warming is an imminent disaster, although the geological forces seem to be at work. The natural things that would cause global warming anyway seem to be at work. And an interesting thing about a space-based solar shield is it doesn't matter if humans cause it or Mother Nature does it herself, or it appears actually there's an interesting correlation between solar cycles, the amount of energy emitted by the sun, and global warming. They seem to track very, very well, in which case Al Gore's solution won't work, because unless he tells the sun to just quit throwing so much energy at us, it's just not going to do the job. But a solar shield would. And if you need it to be bigger, we'll just make it twice the size of Texas, and it'll do the trick. So we presume global warming was the triggering disaster. People will accept it on faith that you need a lot of people to build something big in orbit. Sounds good to me. If you have a lot of people in space, you can build an L5. We like L5 because that's what Jerry said, right? So we all kind of like L5, and could use that as a construction base and then move the solar shield. So we do suggest in the materials we developed that a space settlement could be built in about a dozen years. It has to be possible to build, and we do believe all of this is technically possible. And well, I guess we've got about 9 minutes left for this presentation, but just kind of skimming over this, because the necessity of the competition requires quick construction, but you could say that the necessity of the impending disaster of global warming requires quick construction. So we actually put together a kind of quick construction technique. You use O'Neill's Stanford Torus as a baseline because it's been designed. And there's certainly construction techniques we can tap into now that would make it a little bit faster to build than building it all of aluminum. You use as much lunar material as you can. There's a material called super adobe that's basically like soil-filled fabric tubes. Granted, that may not be stable in tension, but if you can stabilize that, it'll kind of compact itself into whatever you stabilize it into. So, a lot of the challenges of quick construction are going to be in the little things. We can probably solve the big things because we know what they are. You can run a stress equation and figure out how strong your exterior needs to be. But the challenge is going to be on things like how do you get the insides of people's homes, and the toilets, and the faucets, and just normal things, the stuff you're going to use, the robots you're going to have inside, things like that, things we're wearing, our shoes, our clothes. Are you going to ship all that from Earth, or really does it make more sense to develop a way to use extraterrestrial materials to make all that stuff? Things we use every day, adhesives, glue, tires, all those kinds of things, printers, ink. So those are probably going to be the big challenges. And an interesting thing we do in the design competition is we say this will be an international effort, and you can literally get teams all over the world working on developing each of these little problems once they figure out what they are. All right, so we're probably not far off, or we try to make design competition as close to reality as possible, with the exception that reality will happen much slower. And global warming won't necessarily be the reason we do space settlements. Probably we're not going to build space settlements quickly, and it's very probable we won't need lots of people, but we are going to need some infrastructure in place for lots of reasons. And that we do predict, we do feel that we accurately predict that there will have to be some very compelling reason to start the first space settlement. Once the first one is built, the economy starts generating itself like the freeway in Southern California or Middle California. We believe it will be an international effort because it's so huge, and it'll be the kind of thing where you can parcel out the pieces to different countries, different teams, perhaps universities. We don't believe government will be a customer, and those mundane things are the challenge. Do I have another chart? Yes. Big question, when is it going to happen? Don't know. Do we think it will happen? Yeah. But the time frame may be 50 or 100 years. Okay, questions?
My fear in this, in the sense of waiting for an event to trigger it, is that the event might trigger just the opposite.
The question is, how do you motivate people to try to be in a position that they can take advantage of an event as opposed to being very
That is an excellent question. And I think for the people in this room, we're positioned to realize that we can find solutions in space for a lot of things that may not be apparent there are solutions in space. The challenge is, how do we get that word to the general public? I don't have an answer. You found a very key question.
Well, a couple of times in yesterday's seminar I asked a question about, it seems to me like just as power was everything on Apollo 13, public support was everything.
Yes.
In this, and we need to operate on trying to formulate that before this kind of event.
Now, one thing we do,
yeah,
one thing we do with the design competitions is there are 1,000 kids every year who learn about the concept of space settlements and start thinking it's pretty cool. And they all have parents, and at least in this country, their parents vote. But we're only catching 1,000 kids a year. And not all of them, in fact, most of them are in India.
Maybe it'll
dang.
be an Indian space settlement as the first settlement.
Yeah, it could be. So in our little way, and the best I can recommend is each of us in however best we can get the word out. Back in the 70s, we could have gotten instantaneous public support because Colonies in Space was on the Playboy Book Club, and I don't know, Book of the Month probably had one of these space settlement books. It was pretty common. Yes.
Yes,
Very spontaneous, free-flowing.
Thank you.
Humorous, good job.
Well, trying to keep people awake. Trying to keep me awake.
From a layman's perspective, never been to this before my first year, but I think the big events already happened. I mean, it used to be a game for governments, and now it's private sector. And that happened right here. Of course, India, China, all those other places are racing for the same thing. So the race is on. People are starting to print about events like Charles Samani going to space, and how affordable it's going to spot, but getting stuff up there, maybe, so you can stay a while, would be,
Yeah,
everything's
that's,
bananas.
getting cheap access to space is right now,
It's more possible than ever.
it's, well,
Private
it's-
sector.
yeah, if the private sector may be able to do it, but we need to talk about getting big stuff to space. And the big vehicles are not out there. It's hard. Space stuff is really hard.
Earth ingenuity,
Yeah.
world ingenuity, right? Last thing, you know, in my lifetime, I watched Hawaii become a state,
Yeah.
and it was an outpost.
Mhm.
Tourism was the driver,
Yeah.
and now it's Hawaii's state. It's a great
Yeah.
time.
Okay.
Same dynamics.
Hope so. Okay, we have time for one more question, I think, and I saw Joe had his hand.
I think that one of the most powerful forces out there is the commitment and drive of passionate people, people that have been turned on to an idea. And I'm very energized and happy to see that there are things happening right now which are getting people excited. There are people out there that are decided that they are tired of waiting and are chasing their dreams and are spending their own money to chase their dreams. And whether it be by their efforts or by the efforts of those that they inspire, I think that this is a positive thing. Further, the whole space tourism movement is about people getting to go.
Yes.
And as those people go, and I forget who the author was, the overview effect, as more of them experience the overview effect, it's just going to be a rippling effect through society.
One thing we write into the design competition scenarios is that private companies build resorts in orbit, and it becomes a very fashionable thing for wealthy people to do. And you look at the demographics around the world, and the number of millionaires around the world is astounding.
Somebody threw out 8 million.
I would believe that. Yeah,
34,000 a year
it's like,
or more.
yeah,
Something along.
yeah. So, and if there are 30,000 a year, new millionaires every year, and if just 1% was interested in using a few $100,000 to go to space, you've got 300 people a year, new customers. So there really is tourism really is a very interesting wild card that can trigger a lot of things, and I need to yield to the next speaker.